Hello and welcome. Thank you for registering for our webinar panel discussion, hosted by a world leader in building analytics software, CIM. Your chair for the next 45 minutes. My name is Jim McClelland. I'm founder and editor SUSMeme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Our topic today in the Future of Building Operations series is the role of data in driving sustainable and operational excellence. Our panelists will delve deep into the role of data in driving sustainability, also how data is supporting day-to-day building operations, and if it's not doing so, what more or different is needed. Also the people aspect, changing roles in building operations due to the impact of data. Plus, as we kick off 2023, asking, are we, in terms of the built environment as a whole, doing enough, anything like enough, to hit those global and national emissions targets? And in case you need a reminder of just how high the stakes are now, Davos last week, top CEOs from real estate were pledging to reduce buildings-related emissions by at least 50% by 2030 and to be fully net zero carbon no later than 2050. So on that note, let me introduce you to our panel. Joining me on screen this afternoon are Rowena Crowley, Director of Property Asset Management at Knight Frank. Rowena has over 20 years experience in property and asset management, working on both the client and service side. She's known for applying a strong sustainability focus, not only tracking key developments in the legislative landscape, but ensuring they're acted upon as part of an agile and intelligent, sustainable asset management strategy. Brent Cross, Energy Manager at CBRE. Brent also boasts more than 2 decades of sector expertise, his specialisms being building operations and building management systems. He's currently acting in a management role on BMS systems for an EMEA site by a remote control center for critical alarming and energy optimization. Brent operates as an EMEA energy management lead to create and implement energy initiatives and to measure and verify IPMVP standards, which is International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, as I'm sure you all knew. And Killian Casey, VP EMEA at CIM. Killian leads on all sales and operations for the region. He's an expert in building data analytics, understands the challenges faced by clients and prospects, drawing on over 15 years experience in sustainability, system integration and data analytics. Killian's a certified energy manager with a degree in mechanical engineering from Munster Technological University and is an MBA candidate, Smurfit Business School in University College, Dublin. So it is all live and recorded, and I should add, you'll receive a copy following the session of the recording. Audience, we're on a tight schedule, please. So if you do have a question for our panel, please type it in the box you should see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get round to them in the final Q&A part of the session. And CIM are always very diligent about picking some up offline after the event too. And final housekeeping note, if you could please take a moment to complete what is a very short survey once we end the webinar. That feedback is really helpful to the organisers. Right, enough from me. Question 1, let the debate begin. The role of data in driving sustainability. So as we say, ambitious net zero targets looming large. Those dates are racing up. Sustainability is at the forefront for everyone now, especially since buildings are estimated to account for some 30% of total global emissions, which is a massive chunk. So Rowena, to kick us off, from your experience with Knight Frank and the large portfolio of buildings you manage, how does data support your sustainability efforts?
I suppose to fully understand how a building would operate, understanding the data is really vital. So the simple answer to your question, Jim, is yes. So we would manage all our properties in line with best practice and with current and future legislation at the forefront of our operations. Knowing what coming down the line is really, really important. So we aim to protect, improve the value of our stakeholders' assets. And one large part of how we do that is really by evaluating and improving the sustainability rating of their asset. So we're all on this pathway to net zero. And in Ireland, the Climate Act 2021 legislates that we have to halve our emissions by 2030. We know the built environment contributes to the high percentage of emissions, as you were just saying there, Jim, with operation costs about 27% of that. So in order to achieve reductions in our emissions and to improve on the benchmark, understanding data is key. Our stakeholders include institution landlords, developers, private investors, tenants, and so on. There are a number of motives that drive the need for sustainable data management for our customers. They are bound by legislation, various industry standards. So you have your MES in the UK measuring off your EPCs, your BURs in Ireland. We don't have the minimum standards here in Ireland, but it's coming fast down the track for commercial buildings. You've your EU taxonomy, your GRES, BREEAM, CREM, neighbours, ISO standards, so on. There's a list of them. But implementing and upkeeping of these standards can maintain or increase the value of the asset. So continuously improving of the sustainability performance of the building will avoid stranding assets. So ESG strategy within organizations is also for a large part their strategies are becoming very transparent, so they have to address this, and linked in really with legislation is the financial requirements that we're seeing a lot of. So it's strongly connected as financiers are really increasing their demanding when it comes to sustainable reporting, and this is really driven again by your EU taxonomy legislation. So I think if we need to meet all these standards for all our clients and the legislation, understanding the data for all those inputs are critical, to be honest.
Excellent. Lots of issues in play there. Got us off to a very good start. As you say, evaluating and improving the sustainability rating of assets. Good mention for benchmarking, but a number of motives driving. Could be legislation, could also be standards, could be CSR, ESG, as you say, the investment and finance community is very involved now. And all of this is feeding into the value of those assets and avoiding or minimizing the chances of them ending up stranded. So Brent, coming to you then, currently on site with CBRE in an energy focused role, how does data work for you from your perspective when it comes to sustainability?
Okay, historically I've predominantly been involved with energy management. My key strength is optimization. So data is crucial in terms of me doing my job. So what data does for me, it's three key areas really. It identifies areas in building performance in real time. So this can be like optimization parts of like energy profiles. So if example of this would be data provides your off-peak and your peak energy profiles. Now looking at your off-peak, is it, how thick is it? How chunky is it? Can it be brought down? Are there any bumps in the off-peak cycle? When your on-peak cycle starts, the incline, is it in line with your demand regime or your time regime base? And then also the decline part of it. So in terms of, so it's very important. It also supports continuous monitoring. The one thing I've learned with my experience over the years is that nothing ever stays the same. Buildings, you can tweak it, bring it down, optimize it. If you don't keep your eye on the ball, it generally tends to gradually gain creep. Generally through, and this is, it might be worldwide, but maintenance engineers, for example, have a habit of doing a quick fix and stuff. They'll put stuff into hand. They'll put additional bits into time zones. So it's keeping tabs of all that, having the data that highlights these reference points, and then you bring them back down again. And the great thing about it is you're doing it in real time. You're not having to wait a month for invoice utility bills. So you manage your saving, your optimization. The other thing is, for me, is data to support measurement and verification. Measuring and verifying to IP MVP standards requires data if you're going to do it correctly. So options A or B. So data is very important in terms of getting accurate savings. What this does is it gives, in terms of investment, it gives it credibility, so that for future investment projects, that that investment will come easier. It'll give confidence to your client to support ideas for the future. So measurement and verification, very important as well. And that's
Excellent. Me. Excellent, thanks. Really good summary there. So optimization, as you say, data is crucial. 3 big points: real-time performance, including off and on peak, for example, continuous monitoring. We're effectively in a constant state of flux. Nothing stays the same. You don't want to be overly reactive, responding to things long after they've happened. And thirdly, measurement and verification. And you mentioned accuracy and credibility, and of course, how this is attractive to investors. So then, Cillian, coming to you now in this first round of questions. So viewing things from a slightly different perspective, your role with CIM, has the availability of sustainability metric data improved, and can it really help building managers achieve targets?
Yeah, so look, it has improved quite a bit over the last 5 to 7 years. However, I think still not enough people are actually leveraging the data that already exists within the buildings that they have. First off, and Rowena touched on it, but it's really kind of an obvious one, but it's understanding your baseline, you know, understanding what your baseline is made up of and what are the main contributors, etc. So, you know, in the ISO 50001 world, it might be what are your significant energy users as an example to kind of zone in on them. But you really do need a starting point to, you know, benchmark improvements, I suppose, pre and post changes and implementations. There are actually probably still many buildings out there that at best people collate annual utility data from bills with, you know, little or no thought put into, you know, what's actually driving the consumption. And obviously there are many other organizations that are, you know, advanced in this space, which no doubt Rowena and Brent will touch on through their experiences. Data analytics tools provide visibility on how your building and the equipment in it is performing and where you can improve. And that's kind of how it's been used from that end. And this capability has certainly helped, you know, building managers achieve their targets or whatever targets are set out by the business. Ideally, what you want is to turn this sometimes, you know, very, I suppose, technical data into very easy to understand messages and directions that can result in quick and often, you know, quite substantial wins as well to head towards your sustainability targets. And then, you know, to get results, it's kind of something I bang on quite a bit, but it's kind of having the accountability and the collaboration through the technology, which is kind of really key. So it's kind of important from that end then that the data and information presented to the operators is clear to ensure that the actions are taken and results are actually achieved. So again, kind of easy to understand is a key one. Brent touched on it a while ago as well, but you know, with the data, you can take some pretty solid and accurate measurement and verification, you know, to help quantify and qualify the improvements, which again leans into how data can improve the operations from a manager perspective. And then also kind of having, you know, data allows you to be a bit more flexible and you know, you can be a bit more mobile with your operations. So operators can use things like, you know, tablets or mobile phones to be a lot more efficient and essentially kind of, you know, they carry really a kind of a real life replica of the building in their pocket, showing how the building is performing instantaneously. And then from an emissions perspective, they may not need to travel to the sites to fix the issues as much. They can do a lot of it from, you know, the comfort of their own armchair and save on you know, this kind of Scope 3 emissions and stuff from a travel perspective there as well.
Excellent, thanks, Cillian. So yeah, improvement, it is happening. Still though, as you say, by no means all data has been leveraged. There's a lot of opportunity remaining there. Analytics help turn that data into intelligence for decision makers in a way that's easily understood and managed. Nice point about accountability via technology. Data gives transparency and of course visibility over operations. And a final point about flexibility, which given that responsiveness also helps agility too. So nice start. So question 2 then, I'd like to zoom in a bit into the real day-to-day building operations and delve a little deeper. So we're looking at whether data has actually changed the way building managers operate, and if so, has it changed things for the better? So Brent, coming to you first on this. So from your point of view, it sounds obvious, but is data really helping? Are building operations changing across the board now with this access? Is it making that difference?
Yeah, it is. So we can possibly change our approach on how we go about our daily business. And what I mean by that is that we generally have a sort of planned maintenance activities where we have PPMs and then we do reactives on a daily basis. If we have a good data flow, led to, let's say, a fault analytics platform that can give us, non-performance issues in real time, we could possibly move away from we'll sort of scale down a planned PPM maintenance regime down to a reactive deal as issues come up, and then to a life cycle replacement strategy. I think today, in the times that we're in at the moment, in particular, is that traditionally we were building services is time regime based, time clocks, time zones. I think we're moving to more to a demand-based control strategy, whereby due to COVID and changes of occupancy, the old Tuesday to Thursday now, we're Monday to Friday, hardly anyone in the building. So, an example of that would be, we generally provide fresh air for the full occupancy, within a building. So when we don't have that on now, we're leading towards demand strategies where you may possibly have CO2 sensors, so that we can only pump in the required amount of fresh air. We can be variable in terms of our delivery. And just be a bit more smarter, as opposed to just running plant from 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, for example. So, and as occupancy data becomes better, we can be a bit more flexible, and that will help us in terms of this demand-based. And that's where I think things are leading at the moment, is demand-based from traditional methods.
Excellent. And so, so it obviously can change the approach you're saying around, say, planned maintenance, and a good data flow can optimize those regimes, maybe improve the efficiency. And we're moving from traditional, more rigid, time-based approach to more demand-led environment, effectively working smarter. And of course, fluctuating occupancy levels, pre and post-COVID, etc., have really highlighted the need to be more flexible and agile in terms of how we manage our buildings and assets. So great points there from you both. So moving now, Rowena, coming over to you then. So in terms of what you think, question remains, of course, could we do more?
Well, I suppose firstly, I wholly agree with Brent, and that's what we're seeing. A lot of the big changes operationally from this time regime based strategy to really the demand based control. And a lot of our office buildings, on a Friday, if there's people there, but we're still heating and providing lighting, all these systems for the same amount of time. So we have to really adjust that, and the input from all your stakeholder engagement is going to be critical to really develop that out, to let them understand it. So gone are the time clocks, as you say, 7 to 7 when people are in the office or something like that. It's, understanding how many people are in the office from lunchtime on a Friday or on a Friday. So that is a key area that we're really, really seeing. And I mean, the streamlining and I suppose collection and understanding the data improves the efficiency and all the evidence-based decision making across all our sites. There's still lots more we can do, absolutely, but we need to continuously explore maybe opportunities to use more green technologies, making buildings as efficient as possible. So really looking at our lighting, our HVAC systems, reducing, and this has a real positive impact, reducing our operation costs, as Brent was saying, optimizing our supply chain. You're reducing your waste. We're seeing great buy-ins to that. We do competitions across our sites as well, which tenant can reduce the amount of most waste within a month, improving the well-being of employees, and ultimately really just creating our smarter buildings, tying into the predictive maintenance, the PPMs, as Brent was talking about, and try reduce the amount of reactive maintenance items that we need to do by really understanding what's driving these faults. It actually leads to maybe more increased productivity in our systems throughout our buildings. And I suppose ultimately, Jim, it's just a better use of resources, reducing our emissions and costs.
Excellent, good points. Yeah, as you say, echoing Brent's comments about the shift from time-based to more demand-led, Nice mention for stakeholder engagement, evidence-based decision making, and opportunities that are emerging to make the most of, say, green technology. As you suggest, there's cost and carbon win-wins to be had there in terms of performance and resource optimization. And effectively now we're maybe seeing real estate and property owners begin to compete around smart and sustainable agendas increasingly in the marketplace. So positive notes there. So Cillian, so maybe if we're looking a little down the line then, if I could ask you a little bit about where we're going, what do you see as the future for building operations now we have this access to metric level data? Where's it going, Cillian? Where's it taking us?
Yeah, look, there are various angles I could probably take with this, as it's, you know, pretty diverse and you could get pretty deep. But, you know, I'll focus on, you know, maybe some things that we are currently implementing with some of our probably maybe more advanced clients. And just to, I suppose, double click on what Brent and Rowena said there, relating to kind of data-driven maintenance. So that's definitely kind of next step in using data, and it's become very topical and even becoming one of those buzzwords right now. But, you know, we have worked, you know, with clients to completely rewrite their maintenance contracts to incorporate, you know, data-driven maintenance and fault detection and diagnostics into their into the based offering, and typically this then can result in, you know, large savings in the maintenance contract. But then again, typically kind of what we see work best with this type of contract is that you kind of reinvest the savings made on the maintenance contract back into the building to actually drive the performance. You know, an example of this, you know, would be, you know, giving a contractor an allocation of ad hoc hours, you know, in that service contract to respond and rectify things that are identified by the platform, instead of, you know, the constant quotes, and these are things that would maybe typically historically need quotes. And to give you an example for that, it could be something around, you know, a valve replacement on a piece of equipment where previously it would be a full-on quote, whereas now you can, you know, put forward the use of allocated hours and couple this with kind of the known raw material cost, which you would also include on a schedule of rates in the contract. So again, you know, some good results here. And this, you know, firstly results in, you know, less carbon intensive buildings, but then you've got the less unplanned costs, more control and visibility on forecasting your costs. And then, you know, you never know, the best thing, you know, at the end of it, if you've got hours left over in the contract, you can get maybe the mechanical and the BMS contractor to, you know, wash your car or something. Obviously not, you're not going to do that. But at the end of the day, the sole purpose of data-driven maintenance is to improve, you know, the operation of your facility and drive it to be more efficient. And I know this is predominantly about sustainability, but we can't ignore the occupants, and Rowena touched on this. You know, the operations teams can have and really need the data to ensure the workplace is safe and comfortable for the tenants. And, you know, again, both touched on the remote working, which is becoming more and more of a norm. So we really want to kind of entice people to the office as much as possible, you know, or maybe we'll all be out of jobs. So, you know, we need to ensure that the spaces are operating to a level that is, at the very least, you know, tenants don't feel uncomfortable or need to complain, and having visibility and analytics on, you know, zone temps, humidity, CO2 sensors, you know, fresh air sufficiency, again, which Brent touched on, and of course occupancy sensors will ensure the tenant has the best possible experience when in the office. And the other option is, you know, to give them all a terrible experience in the office and they all work from home, and then we can solve the carbon emissions issues by, you know, closing commercial buildings and pushing it out into the suburbs. But again, we probably don't want to do that. And then I suppose another example of using data would be even simple things like cleaning regimes in offices, which can help sustainability, where, you know, you undertake analytics on fixtures and fittings, which is where we're doing with some clients, which track things like toilet flushes and tap enables. And this then dictates when cleaners kind of need to attend and clean. And what it does then is in turn reduces the need for kind of unneeded chemicals, you know, which is obviously beneficial, you know, to the environment as well. So it's using the data outside of just the mechanical systems. It's looking to the broader operations. And again, look, I could probably name a few more, but that's kind of just touching the surface at a high level, which I thought was pretty topical given.
Excellent. Some nice examples to illustrate what you're saying there about data-driven maintenance, and leading with a strong point about reinvesting some of the money saved. It's not just a cost-cutting exercise. We want to upgrade our facilities effectively if we want to progress into a more modern version of the built environment. And a nice point about the fact we're talking about workplaces. Of course, there are the workers, where occupancy levels is about occupants, and it's so their experience as well, the user experience, the UX with our buildings, you know, and indoor air quality, for example, IAQ, very much come to the fore, of course, around COVID, and there's heightened some of the expectations in terms of those occupants around how their buildings will function, with potentially some cost and maintenance and upgrade considerations on part of the building owners and managers. So we're getting into the issues now, and I'd like to talk about the people in terms of the roles of those responding to this impact of data. So now, a few questions around looking at building, facilities, operations managers, and how it affects them. So Rowena, coming to you first then, we're drilling down to the detail. Has data actually changed these day-to-day roles, and is it being embraced correctly and positively by the people in the jobs?
So, yeah, no, it's interesting one, because I think our roles has changed hugely over the last maybe 24 months in relation to, and as I said, this may be predominantly driven by legislation where investors are really seeing the change in value. So for example, say take just a very small element of commercial building on your investments. Investors are very aware of minimum standards. As I said, we don't have them in Ireland like we do in the UK, but they are coming down the track. But there's already an acceptable B rating on your BER that's in place. And so everybody's looking at this rating that they have on their building. And if it's not, say, a B2, how do we get to that B2? And the operational element and the data is critical for that. So while we've always used data really to inform the operation of building, I suppose in the past it was more manual, and it was from property and facilities managers more in common areas where we would have had control over. And over the last number of years, to really optimize the building's efficiencies and to reduce these emissions and to have this impact on investment value as well, we need to understand the data-driven and tenanted areas as well. And a lot of our occupiers, we find, are getting on board with this as it's driving into their own ESG policies. But I suppose understanding the impact of the operational actors, it's essential to get a good grasp of the data. And this means you need to know how to gather it. You need to know how to store it, how to process it, how to analyze it. And whilst data is immensely useful, I think it can be very complex. It's new to a lot of us, all this, all this legislation and thing, and it can be daunting. So like in Knight Frank, what we do is we set up a number of green ESG committees amongst tenants, and this can really help them on their journey to assist in explaining data. So for example, if we have an energy management system that Cillian referred to, this ISO 50001, it really can help them understand the importance of their data, using benchmarks. We talked about setting KPIs, getting these benchmarks and baselines, and really being able to take corrective actions, I suppose, in optimizing the management of the building. And again, as I said, from your tenant's point of view, you're reducing your operating costs through service charges, their own direct costs, as well as the landlords, and improving ultimately ratings of buildings.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, so I think you're saying there, so that, and it's always information, if you like, and data has always informed the operation of our buildings, but historically, traditionally more manually. Now, of course, we're embracing effectively a data revolution. I don't think it's too much to call it that. And occupiers are getting on board, as you say, positively. But there is a lot to consider: the gathering, storing, processing, as well as analysing the analytics end of things. And of course, that begs a whole number of skills questions, perhaps, and resource internally and externally in terms of the necessary expertise when it's required. So some nice points in play then. So coming then in this bit to you, Cillian, so with your overall view throughout CIM clients, what actual benefits have you seen when it comes to the building management and operational functions in terms of roles around data? So how is it helping your clients in terms of the roles involved?
So, firstly, actually, making use of the existing data. So working, smarter sounds like a bit of a cliche, but having more time in your day to be more productive. For example, if you get a temperature complaint, having smart solutions like data analytics tools will help you pinpoint the exact cause of that temperature complaint within reason. As you know, temperature complaints can be can be escalated for many reasons. But if there's a legitimate mechanical issue, you will kind of know where to look and how to rectify it instantaneously with kind of the algorithm set up in top systems like, you know, CIM's peak platform, of course, breaking open, you know, the black boxes and turning the data into actions and results without having to be a data scientist as well, or without having to break the bank to do so is also key. Is kind of just bringing it to the masses, really bringing this technology to the masses. A big benefit also from an operations perspective is kind of having a portfolio view on the performance of all your buildings, kind of from one area or one window, from a very high level, you know, looking at energy consumption and carbon emissions, and comparing each building and having kind of a comparative view, and then digging right down on each building as well to the usage and even the temperature profile of an individual, you know, tenant in an office on the 5th floor, and having that analysis as well. So going right from the sensor right up to the, you know, the high level metrics of all your buildings. You know, I suppose historically, you know, the property operations landscape has been quite fragmented, I guess, due to, you know, the siloed nature of building systems in general, which has limited the use case to single stakeholder use. However, luckily, you know, building technologies available now can provide a holistic view of all properties under management from kind of one location to allow, as I say, the comparison without, you know, whilst kind of also driving engagement, collaboration with stakeholders on the platform, etc. You know. And for fear of sounding like a broken record, you know, collaboration really drives accountability and results, as I mentioned earlier. So it's really about ensuring that you're not just, you know, identifying issues, you're actually closing them out. You know, a prime example of this is with one of our portfolio clients. You know, they've got 58 of their commercial offices on the platform, and nearly 300 stakeholders are actively engaged on that platform, driving these improvements and driving these efficiencies. And amongst other things, this client has seen a reduction in, you know, 17.4 million kilowatt hours since 2019 because of the visibility, the data analytics provided, you know, coupled with that, I suppose, that collaboration component.
Excellent, some nice points. And again, this word productivity is coming through strongly. Nice point about bringing it to the masses, not just remaining in the domain of data scientists. And a good point also about the portfolio view. We're talking about joined up thinking. We're talking about getting out of these silos, and that's essential if we're going to have this kind of mainstreaming that we hope for. It has to be available and used by as many people as possible and as much of the time as possible. So we've got a lot of positives coming in there, but I don't want to play exactly good cops and bad cop. But Brent, coming to you then, I'm kind of going to challenge if you give us maybe a bit of a reality check. So has anything gone wrong? What can happen? What can happen when things go wrong, Brent? Talk to us about the less happy side of things.
I'll put a different spin on that question. I'll say what can be improved,
Okay.
with the glass half full.
Well played.
Okay, so from my experience, talking about building services, applications, and data, it's always been a problem. Like, building services doesn't seem to fit in the corporate world of your client IT. It's almost like a square peg in a round hole scenario. So they're quite rigid in their approach in terms of using their corporate network to send data out to the cloud-based solutions for fault analytics or power monitoring or whatever. So my sort of like spin on it would be that there needs to be better collaboration between corporate ITs and building services data, so that it can be easily, readily transported out to cloud-based solutions, because we're all in it together, really. So there needs to be a better solution in that, from my perspective. The other one is that what I've found is that when you bring on, say, like a fault analytics or anything to do with data managing, is that they don't appropriate or fund the correct amount of resource to deal with the outputs that come from these systems. What they often do is they just get bolted on to the maintenance teams or the teams that are already there.
Yep.
So there's little buy-in from them to deal with something else, because they're already doing what they should be doing, what they're contractually obliged to do with traditional methods of building maintenance. So my other improvement would be that if you're going to do it, manage data properly, there needs to be the correct amount of resource to deal with the outputs, and also to minimize the outputs as well. So be as efficient as you can with your, say, fault analytics system, so that it doesn't bog people down and just think, oh God, we're never going to win on this game. So yeah, be more efficient and effective. And that's
Excellent.
it.
Some very nice points there, and I appreciate your flip there to the glass half full. Well played there. So yeah, talk about collaboration between corporate IT and building services data. And you also talked about the need for buy-in, not just viewing this as some kind of bolt-on, but of course buy-in literally, there's a reason why it's called buy-in. It costs money potentially. You need to allocate resource, or at least time, money, if you want that level of integration. And in fact, it sort of picks up in a sense a nice one of the questions we have as well from Aaron O'Loughlin, which we'll maybe pick up after the event, but it made a nice point about the SDGs and the corporate agenda and CSR and carbon accounting, and how this actually syncs together or doesn't with the tech end and the data end of things. And that's very much about how we're operationalizing things. So now we're into the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes. So bit of future gazing. I'd like to sort of wrap up. I mean, we're already, can you believe it? We're in the last week of January 2023. So looking ahead, built environment overall, I'm going to ask you, I'm in danger of asking a closed question, which you give me a yes or no, but if you say a little bit more than that in a quick fire response, overall, are we doing anything like enough to hit those global emission targets that we talked about at the top of the show? So Rowena, coming to you first, are we doing anything like enough?
Well, let's take Brent's approach and go glass half full, I suppose. We're on the right track, but we're quite short of it. And I think actually that going back to that question raised there, you just said, I think that's the key thing. And I actually just read in the paper this morning, there was a survey done by, I think it was William Fry solicitors, looking at companies, and they have these ESG policies, they have their legislation driven standards, but are they actually implementing it, and do they know how to implement them and everything else like that? And it's directly linked back to Brent, all the different departments having to talk to each other. So everybody wants to do it. We're on the right track. It's not moving fast enough. And you know, say if I'm going from the property management side of it, really how to reduce our emissions and how to reach these 2050 ultimately our goals, we need to achieve, it's still more open data. People are still a little bit closed with their data, and it's to understand the shared data requires effort and considered action, and we need to keep continuing to embrace ESG disclosure, really data management in order to measure our relevant KPIs. So it's like you're defining your strategy, but performing the benchmarks and report on performance. And this is just, it's going to be collaboration. We've talked about it. Killian's mentioned collaboration, Brent's talked about collaboration, but from all stakeholders involved: landlords, tenants, property managers, agents, lawyers, solicitors, when drawing up leases, to let tenants know how to do this. And it's a journey we're all on together, the right direction. But yeah, we need a lot more to do before we reach any of our global targets. Excellent.
Nice conclusion. So positively on the right track, but we're slow. We're behind, we're off the pace. More talking, more team working, and that can be embodied in things like open data, but also embracing ESG criteria around your KPIs and collaboration. Collaborate. So Killian, coming to you then, same question. Are we doing enough?
I'm going to maybe break the mold and go glass half empty here, right? Because I don't think we're doing enough at all. So from my experience, you know, buildings here in Ireland, UK, and even the US are typically not really performing optimally. And this is for a number of reasons. I suppose what would be good, or what I'd like to do, is, again, based on my experience, make a comparison to buildings here in the UK and the US versus other regions. And a great example where kind of peak building performance is being achieved is kind of in Australia, where they seem to have really kind of grabbed the bull by the horns. And they did this by introducing neighbours, which Rowena mentioned a while ago. And for the listeners who don't know what it is, it's nothing to do with Kylie and Jason. It's more around the National Australia Built Environment Rating System, right, which was essentially introduced in, I think it was the noughties to kind of, and it was legislated then that all commercial offices over, I think it was initially 2,000, but every commercial office over 1,000 square meters needs to publish an energy rating annually. And that is, you actually publish how your building performed from 0 to what was 5 stars, now 6 stars every year. You know, all advertising, etc. you did when leasing or selling the building needed to include this rating. And this really made the building owners kind of take notice and truly invest in, you know, sustainable technologies to help drive down the CO2 emissions, and also then maintain them as well, given, you know, the annual audit. Firstly, because it can be, you know, pretty embarrassing if you've got a portfolio of buildings that aren't running very well. And secondly, you know, government agencies and the likes then started not leasing any buildings lower than a certain level. I think initially 4.5 stars, now 5 stars, maybe even 5.5. And thirdly, then, you know, they started to influence leasing in general, and in turn asset valuations, which obviously Rowena touched on as well a moment ago. So in essence, I do think governments kind of need to be involved a bit more to drive a bit harder to kind of force people to make these tough decisions to invest more into the property. And to be fair, you know, there are many companies and organizations that have their own net zero targets and are doing enough, but we need to make that, you know, consistent across the board. So in essence, it needs to be driven from the tenant in some instances, but also driven from the landlord, kind of top down, bottom up. Governments need to get involved, and they need to get involved now. And then finally, one thing that's kind of helped is, luckily, you know, energy prices have gone up, and this has really kind of put the spotlight on this as a priority from a financial perspective, but hopefully it will drive the carbon emissions agenda as well.
Good point. Yeah. So, as you say, you're kind of glass half empty, buildings typically not performing optimally. You're challenging markets such as UK, Ireland, Europe, US. Look to Australia, see the art of the possible. Things can change and move forward. Nice call out for government effectively to perhaps use more sticks as well as carrots to try and force some of this through, top down, bottom up. And of course, as we're all saying at present, energy prices should be focusing the minds more and maybe getting some of that investment through in terms of future proofing against those kinds of scenarios. So we're into the last couple of minutes. So I'm coming now for a finishing comment from you, Brent. We've had Rowena was glass half full, Killian was glass half empty. So you kind of got the casting vote. Brent, are we doing enough?
Oh, I'm going to sit on the fence here. I'll call it a draw. Well, to be honest, I'm not sure. I know so my spin on this is like from a client and like an FM building services provider that, you know, we're working hard to drive impact and savings, in terms of reducing it. So a different spin on it for me would be is that the occupants, for example, right? We know through this energy crisis we're going through at the moment that occupants, when they're at home, they will drive energy down because it directly impacts their wallet and their cost of living. So we know they can do it. When they come to work and they're occupants at work, their whole energy focus changes because they don't pay the bills. So they don't have a real energy focus because carbon emissions aren't, they're not tangible. So my thinking is that maybe we need to work on the cultural behaviors of the occupants and how they adapt and operate in the workspace. A great example of this was in Spain last October, I think it was. They made it mandatory for businesses to provide a deadband of 19 degrees C and 27 degrees C for heating and cooling in order to save energy. So I'm not saying go that harsh, but I'm saying maybe we need to educate people at work so that they can be a little bit more responsible when it comes to making decisions that might impact energy consumption within the buildings. And maybe as a country, maybe we need to adopt the Spanish approach and be have a bit more sort of like dictate in terms of energy. Because I know, I don't know about you guys, but my thermostat at home, I'm wearing a coat just to prove it. It's
Yeah.
like set at 18 degrees C. You know, like a year or two ago, it would never be 18 degrees C. It would be at 20, 21. Yeah, and that's my take on it.
Excellent. Some great insights and ideas to finish with. Call for the educational piece in terms of driving impact and savings, and you're really challenging the industry perhaps to engage occupiers and occupants more, and you're talking about cultural and behavioral shift, not just technological change. So nice points to finish on. So final thoughts from me then, try and sum up now quickly. Sort of in many sectors, I would say we've entered a sort of growing up phase for sustainability, and built environment's no exception. Targets have been set, but we're moving on now from just ambition and intention into action, application. So success is all in the delivery, and we must operationalize sustainability. In that, data is key, getting the right data in the right hands at the right time. I close by saying the old adage runs, to manage something first, you've got to measure it. But I'd like to add, and then you have to message it, communicate within teams, across companies, sectors, clients, stakeholders, suppliers, press, media, even the general public. What I'm saying is this is show and tell time for sustainability in a competitive marketplace. Not enough just to be green, you need to be seen to be green, and you do that with data. Data is how you operationalize sustainability. So on that note, we are bang on time. A big thank you to all our panelists, Rowena, Brent, and of course, Killian, our host at CIM, to yourselves, our virtual audience out there, for joining us in your lunchtime, your desks, and on your screens. That's it for today. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SUSMean. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all again soon.